Hello, this is a video essay covering themes within Jia Zhanke's films The World and Still Life that traverse a border dynamic and convey Jia Zhanke's impact on Chinese cinema and national cinema. And the first concept is the character's identity. Within each film, the characters are stuck in a social class, but they dream to or strive to change their lives or cross the thresholds of their social status. They battle between knowing and not knowing their identity, being an outsider or a local, being temporary or permanent resident. This first clip is from The World, and it shows Tao and Taixing, a couple who work at the theme park in Beijing of landmarks from around the world, giving Langzi, Tao's ex, a ride to the train station as he's traveling to Mongolia. He has a passport, to which Tao is surprised and intrigued, even though she slightly boasts about working at the park, where she gets to see the world without ever leaving Beijing. It shows how much people like Tao value the passport to have the ability of mobility. Having a passport therefore becomes a sort of a status symbol. Having one means being that one has made it to an extent. Eddie Bartozzi writes, the striking contrast between the park's simulacra and an unreachable outer world, a falsified sense of motion, and the factual paralysis thus lead to a confused perception of reality, space-time connections, and personal identity. This second clip is Tao and Taixing participating in a park's activity to escape their reality. They were previously quarreling as Taixing was being disrespectful in the previous scene, but coming back to the clip, they participate in a magic carpet ride and are told to brighten up. A TV screen that shows the fictitious product explicitly and ironically shows how Tao and Taixing view their current situation, being able to enjoy the international fruits of the world because they are living and working within them, feeling like they are living paradise when in fact they are living a forged one. This next clip is from Still Life. It shows Han Sanming from Shaanxi paying his landlord in gangster gratitude in cigarettes, adjusting to Fengji as he is searching for his wife and daughter who he last saw 16 years ago. The first part of this clip shows the gangster watching a movie of a gangster lighting a cigarette with money. We can tell that this character admires a fictional gangster. More on this in a second. We then see the difficulty of communication between Sanming and Mr. He, the landlord, as they speak in different dialects. Here we notice the border that lies between Sanming and Mr. He. Sanming is the outsider, Mr. He is the local. The difficulty communicating is the explicit border that Sanming encounters, and perseveringly he keeps on trying to abolish his limitation of being an outsider. We see this many times in the film as it progresses. Then we notice that this gangster is embodying the character that he just saw in the film he was just watching, and quite exactly to the T, as he wears sunglasses and lights a cigarette the same way. Although not with money, he representingly tears a piece of paper and uses its burning to light his cigarette. We see that he's living in his own world, to say it in general terms, and this character shows a position of not knowing his identity, just living one from the past presented and glorified in the film he was just watching. Pingzhu writes, oppressed by the inexorable here and now, these individuals are unable to make connections between their past, present, and future. No matter how grand the official narrative of the Three Gorges Project is, it is only felt by these marginalized individuals as an irresistible force of destruction. Then we have the scene which tells us more about the life in Fengji. Sanming is having dinner with Brother Mark. We notice that in Fengji and or in Chinese culture, it is a society guided by the notion of brotherhood among men. Pingzhu also writes, the characters in Still Life therefore can be divided into three groups: those who are forced to forget the past, the local peasants, immigrant workers, and Brother Mark; those who actively destroy the past, Ding Yeling and the cadre Guobin; and those who endeavor to salvage the past, Sanming and Shenhong. Again, characters like Brother Mark and even the gangster are forced to forget the past and forge an identity as they are constrained to the outcomes of Fengji and the decisions of Chinese government. Then we see Sanming telling the story of how he lost his wife. His treatment of women as property is one tradition that Jia Zhanke would clearly reject, but in this case it serves his larger theme of private relations being corrupted by the marketplace mentality, as with prostitution in his other films. A quote from Kinyan Zetsu. The next concept of border present in these two films is genre. Jia Zhanke pushes the boundaries of film genre of realism with Jishizuyi, an exemplified execution of Andre Bazin's ideals for realism in film. Here we have the introduction of still life, where we get a seemingly handheld camera moving through a boat arriving at Fengji. The camera is in close-up to the passengers on board, and we are witnessing real-time events happening on the boat. It is almost documentary-like as the camera continuously glides through the boat, not focusing on a single conversation, but allowing the audience to effectively experience sitting or moving through the cramped boat. Zhangke transitions to seemingly different areas of the boat through blurred transitions that keep the diegetic audio rolling throughout the entire time. From Bertozzi, the visual asset of this first scene is already representative of the whole film's aesthetic managing of reality, swinging between documentary observation and poetical reflection, appearing close to the viewer's personal experience, yet undefined, if not indefinable, at the same time. Returning back to the clip of Tao and Taixing living in Yangtze, giving Yangtze a ride after their small talk ends, we notice that Jia Zhanke uses the long shot here to show the characters' realizations that none of them would be able to see the Eiffel Tower. Seeing these facial expressions allows the audience to feel and recognize the same emotion, reinforcing the information of Jishizuyi and realism. And as we read from Ting Luo, Jia Zhanke shows the epitome of sixth-generation Chinese realism films. Notably, many significant stylistic traits of Jishizuyi characterize sixth-generation films, such as non-dramatized narration, handheld shots, long takes, location shooting, tracking shots, synchronous sound recording, and the use of non-professional actors. These next two segments from the world showcase Jia Zhanke's use of animations that seemingly come out of nowhere. They depict the events that do happen next in the film, just in an unorthodox way. The insertion of these animations is meant to break the audience's expectation of reality as something surreal. In particular, to the second animation that happens, we see that Tao and Taixing are sitting in a prop plane. Taixing gets a message that he has to run an errand. Tao suggests that he let her tag along because she would turn into a ghost if she were to stay at the park. The animation explicitly shows that for Tao, leaving the park is something different and surreal to her day-to-day reality of working at the park. A quote from Jia Zhanke: "I have the impression that a surrealist atmosphere prevails in China today because the entire society faces an enormous pressure to speed up. As a result, many strange and unimaginable events have occurred in reality. As they say, reality is more exceptional than fiction. The surrealistic elements sound unbelievable to most of us, but they are part of reality." We also see very surreal events that happen in still life. The first being a UFO that flies through the sky that both San Ming and Shen Hong witness. A quote from Bertozzi: "It captures the character's sense of being lost while fighting for a better future among the enormous changes of post-socialist China. The two protagonists raise no clamor at the sight of the flying object, testifying that non-normal situations have become daily matters." Jia Zhanke then shows us still close-ups of the new area that the audience is being put in as we start following Shen Hong's story of her search for her husband, Guo Bin. Again, we feel as though we are watching a documentary as we see still shots of things present in this new setting, but we still hear noise of what's happening or what would happen in this setting in the background. We also have the surreal rocket takeoff of a building in still life. This showcases the quick and unprecedented changes that are occurring in Fengji, closely alluding to the mass amounts of people having to move. The last concept of border is China's identity as a nation, presented and critiqued in Jia Zhanke's films. Just as we see in this clip, Tao is sitting on the monorail that circuits the park, her reality. and painstakingly shows the desire for China to be like its capitalist allies, at the cost of its citizens experiencing post-socialist effects. Start quote, capturing an intimate narrative against the backdrop of encounter between the lower-class workers and the transnational spectacle, the world suggests that the World Park is an imaginary projection of Chinese people's aspirations to integrate into the global system of capitalism. The film at the same time demonstrates a new basic spatial form emerging in the process of China's globalization, stimulated space, analogous to Disneyland. End quote from Ting Luo. As its economy booms, China becomes increasingly enmeshed in the networks of transnational capitalism. The global-local interaction can best be viewed from a dialectical perspective. Global capitalism both integrates with and contradicts post-socialist localities. Information technology and commodity circulation may offer connections to the global village, but the technological revolution distances Chinese people from their local origins and cultural traditions. As globalization weaves a web of relations among nations, it exacerbates social differences and economic inequalities within the locality. End quote from Shu Kun Kui. This is something we notice in the clip where Tao was talking to a little sister about the people who travel, suggesting that the ones who do are in a different social class, and shows the division in China's portrayed identity. We even see this in the beginning of Still Life, where San Ming is forced to learn from the master to make money. The focus of making money shows the capitalist ideals bleeding into China's society and seemingly its soon-to-be economy. San Ming is even forced to pay for the lesson he just learned, of which there really wasn't anything to learn from. Start quote, Jia Zhanke's films examine how China's 30 years of radical socio-economic change have deeply affected ordinary people on many levels, including their material, emotional, and family lives. End quote from Kin Yan Setso. The local caterer, who has the power to build a cross-river bridge and light it up by making a simple phone call, are people who are actively destroying the past to make way for a grand future. The ubiquity of this past destructive power represents the obscene conflation of the political and capital, driven by insatiable desires for political capital and economic interest, and encouraged by China's new state ideology. As Deng Xiaoping puts it, the development is the absolute principle. The local caterers and the entrepreneurs become the ruthless implementers of incessant and violent destruction. A quote from Ping Zhu. These characters in Still Life that ruin the past represent China's new capitalist identity and show their decisions are destroying the prior identity and some of its culture. In this next clip, we see that Shen Huang leaving Fenji on a boat, and we hear on the overhead speakers a recording of a voice that glorifies the construction of the Three Gorges Dam through Li Bai's famous poem as an achievement of China by the people of China. However, Jia Zhanke shows this to show how China is commodifying its citizens and advertising the state's actions/decisions as great ones, when in fact that it's more like propaganda. Start quote, as an ideological landscape, the Three Gorges in Li Bai's poem stands in sharp contrast to the official line that frames it, where Li Bai floats through the grand wonder of nature with a stance of non-interference and reverence. The official discourse on the Three Gorges Dam, a project first proposed by Yutzi, then favored by the succession of the CCP leaders, glorifies the taming and domination of nature as a sign of China's emergence as a modern nation. The experience of time has shifted, as the nation's grand narrative is now driven more straightforwardly by capitalist objectives. Despite this shift, Jia's protagonists are nonetheless still passengers of China's post-socialist project, often still onlookers on the roadside watching it as it passes them by. They are doubly haunted by memories of the socialist past as much as by a future that excludes them. A quote from Philippa Lovac. Conclusion. How Jia Zhanke impacts Chinese cinema, nationally and internationally. All these examples point to how Jia Zhanke aims to show the real realities of China and its citizens by showcasing the real moments and allowing the audience to sit and experience these moments. Digesting more than what they see, the audience has time to think about the moments in each, especially elongated segment, and even feel what the characters are emotionally feeling. This again allows the audience to experience, to an extent, China without actually visiting China, allowing the audience to cross the international borders. Start quote. According to me, all the realist modes are there to describe the real world of my inner experiences. We have almost no way to approach reality itself, and after all, the sense of cinema is not merely reaching the level of reality. In films, I pursue a feeling of the real more than reality itself, since I think the feeling of the real concerns aesthetics, whereas the real is only a matter of sociology. A quote from Jia Zhanke. Jia Zhanke's perseverance to produce films that showcase reality and not conform to the mainstream escapist tropes, as seen in most movies in the West, has allowed him to show how there's much more to know about China. There's a lot more that is under the surface that doesn't get mainstream exposure. He also is a showcase example for Chinese cinema and influence to directors and filmmakers who wish to break mainstream barriers, and to those who wish to showcase reality like those involved in documentary. Start quote. Making every attempt to record the current atmosphere, Jia's camera focused on ordinary people, migrant workers, small song and dance troupe actors, and unplayed youth against the actual historical background of post-Mao Chinese society in the Jishizui style. End quote from Ting Luo. One last quote. The significance of Jia and his films lies in the persistent negotiation between center and periphery, between local and global, his concern for people on the socio-economic margins, his experiments with visual articulation, and his refusal to bow to mainstream have enabled him to continue as an independent filmmaker in contemporary China. Quote from Shu Kun Kui.